mute on your side, please. Then we just want to apologize on behalf of Celinda. She unfortunately couldn't make it to the webinar today. She's not only on maternity leave, but also attending a conciliation on behalf of one of our clients. However, her and baby are doing well, happy and healthy. Today we have Abrie Snyman, the CEO of Multiprof, who will be presenting the different types of plans in sectional title. Multiprof renders professional town planning, architectural and related property services to both individuals and the property fraternity. Abrie, over to you.
Thank you very much. Nice to be with you today and share some of my experience and knowledge with all the participants. Just as a starting point, I must emphasize that as far as building plans and sectional title plans are concerned, although there's standard legal ways of dealing with it, different municipalities have slightly different ways of looking at the municipal, the building regulations and things. So this is a general presentation, and each person is advised to talk to your local government or your local authority and find out what of these is applicable. Of course, as far as sectional title is concerned, that is countrywide, so that is fairly basic. But I just want to share the connections that exist between the different types of plans in a sectional title scheme. I often hear that when I ask a body corporate or estate agent, do you have building plans for the unit? They said, no, we have sectional title plans, so we don't need building plans. So then I realized that there's really a big need, and it can be a bit complicated. So I'm going to try and keep it fairly straightforward. And then, of course, at the end, we'll try to answer some questions if we can. Okay, so the three types of plans that we will mainly focus on will be site development plans, building plans, and then sectional title plans. And then just a few others just for interest's sake. Now, where does everything start when it comes to all of these plans? Basically, it starts with the zoning of the property. And this is a typical example of a zoning plan, and it will indicate in different colors what type of activities are allowed on the property, and then how much of it is allowed on the property. So in this case, the yellow will be typical residential one, where you have one dwelling, and then as far as sectional title complexes is concerned, it would typically be residential 2. In the olden days, we called it group housing. And again, that can differ from council to council, but typically residential 2 will allow for a specific density, let's say 25 or 30 units per hectare. And with that, there is certain conditions that goes with that zoning. And when the complex is developed, those guidelines or those restrictions are used by the architect to develop the complex. Now, what makes a complex different from a normal dwelling house? Basically, you need extra precautions to make sure that people living in close proximity are not affecting each other negatively. And therefore, before we can submit plans for a new complex on residential 2, council want to see a plan indicating how these different units are going to interact with each other. Stuff like entrances, exits, driveways, gardens. We will have a look at that now. Council designed it, or they want it to be designed in a way that increase the quality of life in a complex. And therefore, a complex is not really designed to be tampered with. The idea is never that you should be able to make huge changes to it. It was designed with the best quality of life in mind, but in real life, it works a bit different, and therefore we end up with alterations and changes, and the processes we will quickly just look at today. So firstly, you will have a zoning and the zoning certificate, and I advise managing agents and trustees always to have a copy of the zoning certificate at hand and compare what's on the property to that. Now, a typical site development plan, as is requested in many of the municipalities, means a plan which shows the siting, the elevation, the exterior finishes, the parking areas, and spaces for gardens and natural features. And the idea of the plan, as I said, is for council to assist the developer in designing something that is suitable for higher density living. And once the plan is approved, that is set, and any changes you want to make to a complex first need to pass council to ensure that the purpose of the complex is not negatively affected. And as I said, on this one, there's an example of changes that was made. So every time any individual want to make changes, that needs to be also done on the site development plan. Now, there's typically the clause for the site development plan is in the zoning certificate, and it would read a site development plan and the landscape development plan, unless otherwise determined, compiled by a person suitable, qualified to the satisfaction of the council, shall submit for approval prior to submission of building plans. So technically, when a site development plan is required, council cannot approve a building plan before they have approved a site development plan. As I said, what's on a site development plan typically, the height, the siting, the floor area ratio, coverage, the landscaping, entrances, parking spaces, because all of those facets must work together to create a good quality of living. And any changes to it needs to be approved, otherwise it will negatively or can negatively affect the complex as a whole, and therefore an individual cannot act in a way that will negatively affect the rest of the complex, and therefore council want to approve a site development plan. Now, the aspects that is looked at on the site development plan is stuff that comes from the zoning again, and the most important one, I think, in complexes is the coverage. Now, what is coverage? Coverage means the percentage area of a property, including servitudes, covered by roofed areas of all building as seen vertically from above, but does not include roof overhang. So in real life, a complex have a maximum amount of roofed area that is allowed, and that we call coverage. Now, typically in a complex, it can be 30%, it can be 40%, depending on the specific zoning. And part of the problems that we find in a complex is that the developer will very often use up most of the coverage to get the most return on his investment. And any roofed areas that is added afterwards might push the amount of roofed areas to over the permitted coverage. And in some instances, it is possible to apply for a higher coverage. In other cases, you need to apply for a rezoning, and it is possible that council will not approve it. And therefore, it is not a good idea to allow people to add roofed areas in a sectional title complex without following the proper procedures and the processes. And the problem is, if the body corporate have no idea what the existing coverage is with all the additions that was added without proper approval, trustees might be giving permission for more roofed areas, and they already are exceeding the allowed coverage. So that's something to look out for. And then, of course, parking is also a big issue. There's always a minimum amount of parking required, and that is part of the zoning. So it's not for the body corporate just to say, oh, well, we don't need this parking. You know, you can convert your garage, whatever. We don't care. You can just park somewhere else. That is all legal requirements that is designed by way of the site development plan. Now, after the site development plan, that each complex should have where it is required by council, then we can get to the building plans. Now, just back to the sectional, after the site development plan, my personal opinion is that it is the responsibility of the body corporate and therefore the managing agent representing the body corporate to ensure that there's always an up-to-date site development plan available, because you need it to make decisions when there's requests for additions and alterations. Of course, whenever an individual owner wants to make additions, it would be for his cost to update it with the changes he wants to make. But then it should always come back to the body corporate so that they can keep record and keep track of changes that have happened. It's also much cheaper for all the owners if there's an electronic version available that can just be used to resubmit with new changes. If not, and there's very few body corporates that really follow that, it means each owner must eventually redraw the whole site development plan, and the body corporate is not even aware of exactly what the latest available site development plan is. Now, building plans is a requirement according to the national building regulations, and any structure, permanent or temporary, needs building plans. There is some minor building works that is excluded, and that depends on the specific council. In Tshwane, for instance, that almost doesn't exist, and anyhow you need to apply for a structure to be declared a minor building works, and you don't need building plans. And technically, you need to submit a building plan for council to say this is minor building works. You don't have to submit building plans. So, in real life, very few structures are excluded from it. Typically, anything higher than 1.2 meters needs a building plan, or any place higher than a meter if you talk about paving or anything like that, where you need balustrades, where there's a different in height, you need building plans. But let's just look. Typically, this is a building plan for an addition in a complex where there was just a garage added. The important things when you look at building plans, existing building plans, is firstly, you will notice that there's a building plan number on it. When a building plan is submitted, a number will be issued to the plan, and we will later get to another use for that number. But even more important than that is the approval stamp. A plan without an approved stamp is called a piece of paper. We often find that people say, oh, we have plans, or the body corporate, oh, we have plans, and we have a look at the plans. There's no stamp on it. It was done by the architect when they bought the, and council only accept building plans as proof if there's a stamp on it that states approved. We, in the earlier years, and even now in some councils, when you submit the plan, there's also a stamp on the plan, and that says submitted. Now, a submitted stamp means nothing. Often plans are submitted and they can't be approved, and it stays in the system, and you can draw that plan from council and you think you have an approved plan until you scrutinize the stamp and it says submitted. If it doesn't say approved, it's not approved. It is, according to the national building regulations, the responsibility of each owner to be in possession of a set of approved building plans for his unit or his house, and therefore you cannot go to council and say, oh, you lost my plans, now it's your problem. Council have no legal responsibility to keep copies of building plans. They keep it for one reason and one reason only, and that's to lose them. So make sure that you have a copy of your plan. Never buy a property without approved building plans and a certificate of occupancy for that matter, because the moment the property transfer into your name, you become the owner of each and every problem that ever existed with that property. Unfortunately, that have not happened for many years. And now suddenly a lot of problems exist. Banks are starting to insist on approved building plans and sectional title plans, as they should. And also buyers are much more aware of the negative impact that it can have if you buy a property without those documentation and you become liable for it. Okay, that is the typical building plan that we deal with on a daily basis. It's 20, 30, 40 years old, and it's not always very easy to read, but if you want to make additions to a unit, you need to indicate it on a plan. In the complexes, often as well, if there's 60 units, but there's 4 different types, there will only be an example of each type, a plan. There won't necessarily be a plan for unit number 24. Unit number 24 might be a D, and it will be indicated on the site development plan that that is a D, and there will be a separate plan indicating the layout of that unit. So if you go and look at all the documentation and all the plans available, it might be that there is a plan for your unit. It's just not marked as your unit number on it. But whenever you want to make additions, of course, first the site development plan, then you need to submit building plans. The question we often get is inside changes. Do we need building plans? Yes, you need building plans whenever there's a substantial change, when you remove any walls, because that wall can be load bearing. We had cases like that where owner decide to just remove an inside wall. Of course, that carried the roof, and the roof just caved in. And the strange thing is that who would be responsible for that roof? Well, the roof belongs to the body corporate. So the body corporate will have to claim from the owner eventually to have it fixed. So the body corporate does have an interest in the inside of the units as well. So whenever walls are removed, or whenever there's any changes to the plumbing inside of the unit, you need building plans. If you just make a arch square or whatever, I won't bother about things like that, but any significant inside changes also needs building plans. Building plans is only valid for 12 months after approval if it was not activated by a building inspector with the purpose of obtaining a occupational certificate. So if you submit a plan, get it approved, and you put it in the cupboard, in 12 months' time, you don't have a new plan anymore. You'll have to resubmit it, except if you called out the building inspector to activate the plan within a year. Just quickly, some of the bigger issues that we find in complexes specifically that is problematic is firstly, carports. As we said, a carport would be counted as coverage, and each piece of roof that you add in the complex will bring you closer to the maximum amount of roofed area. It needs to be safe, so there will be specific requirements for the type of steel to use to make it safe. And so a carport must in all instances be on a building plan. Even well, in Swane, and even shade netting needs a building plan. You might, it will not add as coverage if it is only shade netting, but you do need to put it on plan. Now, one of the biggest things that we see in complexes when we do plans in the complexes is pergolas. Now, a pergola is basically a pole structure without a roof. And of course, you don't need to indicate that would not count as coverage. You might indicate the pergola just as a pergola, but it will not be coverage. But there's hardly any pergola that stays a pergola for longer than a year before somebody put onto it some transparent sheeting. The moment any sheeting is added to the pergola, it becomes coverage, and you need to put it on a building plan. So you can imagine if there's 60 units and the pergola is 8 square meters in size, and 60 units put clear coverage onto it, the coverage that is added in total in the complex increase quite a bit. And most complexes, that is almost standard practice. Swimming pools, all swimming pools need building plans, and it also need to show the safety measures to prevent children from drowning in it. And in a complex, it's obviously even more critical. We often find that pools and splash pools are built by owners in what they would call their garden, but in real life, it is common property. So you can argue that they have built a pool for everybody because anything on common property can be used by everybody. But that also have the negative consequences that should anything happen in that pool or somebody drown, it is not the owner's problem. It's a body corporate problem because it happened on common property. And therefore, it is important to make sure that building plans are done, that all this security stuff for children and the safety stuff is in place. But yeah, we'll get to the exclusive use areas and things like that. Another big problem is, well, not that big, but most complexes have louver decks and different councils deal different with it. Owners often tell us, well, but it can open. And then council tell us, but it can close. So they see it as a structure in Swane specifically. You need building plans for it. It counts as coverage, and it needs to be on the building plan and on the site development plan. And then the two structures that a body corporate should rethink in a complex that have huge implications is LAPAs and Wendy houses. Wendy houses can only be approved on the building plan for storage purposes. You're never allowed to use it for accommodation. It's not suitable for accommodation, and it have high risk as far as fire is concerned. The same with LAPAs. LAPAs is big fire hazards. There's lots of compliance that needs to happen with LAPAs and Wendy's. And again, it's often placed as well in either servitude areas, open municipal services, or at places very close to other structures. And that can have a huge impact on claims for insurance purposes. Although the insurance company might take note of the fact that there's a LAPA or a Wendy, the argument would be that they insure the complex for normally brick and tile. And the risk for that is, let's say, a 1 in 100,000 that there's a fire. It's not structures that is easily affected by fire, but LAPA that is not treated without the lighting conductor, with a braai inside, with a chimney going through the grass without necessary insulation, is a 1 in 5,000 risk. At some stage, the possibility of a fire is just very good. So should a fire start in either a Wendy or a LAPA, that is a high risk, and 2 or 3 or 5 units burn down, the insurance company can come back and say, listen, we did not insure this risk. And therefore, if it is allowed, it must be done under very strict control, and it must be ensured that it is treated correctly, that there's certificates of occupancy for those structures. And for LAPAs, often councils will insist on a fire engineer, whatever, doing a design, a rational fire design to ensure the safety of it. As we said, Wendy's, you're never allowed to use it for residential purposes. It's not insulated, it's not fire resistant, and in general, it is problematic in a complex. Also, because it is typically also on common property, and it's seldom allocated to a specific unit. just get the frog out of the throat. Sorry. Okay, let's try again. Okay, after the approval of the building plan, the next step that is important in the process is a certificate of occupancy. A building plan indicates what the owner intends building. A certificate of occupancy ensures that what was on the plan was built and to the specifications of the building plan. We referred to the building plan number earlier, and as you can see here, on the building plan, you have the number, and when the building inspector comes out to issue the certificate of occupancy, on the document, he will refer to the plan that he used to issue the plan. That means he took that plan and he compared that to what was on site, and he was happy that everything was done. So any structure that's not on this plan is obviously not covered by this certificate of occupancy. Why is it important to not only use the building plan? If you can see on this plan, for instance, there is foundations indicated on the building plans. We have cases where people decide, no, that's too much hassle, it's too expensive. We're going to do away with the foundations, let's build on the ground. It happens. And so the building plan on its own might indicate that there's foundations. In real life, only once the inspector has checked the foundations, you know they're there. Other similar cases is toilets that is not connected to the system. For instance, on plan, the owner will indicate a pipe linking the toilet that's a bit far out from the unit to the system. In real life, you think, you know, we're going to use it only once a week when the cleaner is here. So why bother spending this money? I just dig a hole, put the pipe in, put some rocks in, close it up. And it can work very well if you use it once a week. But now you sell it and people start using it, and then you realize you have a problem. And that can be in a complex as well. So always make sure that you have a certificate that goes with the building plan to confirm that everything that was done on it. Okay, just a few other plans that we can have a look at that is normally available on council's website is stormwater plans. And typically, if you look on this picture, there's a stormwater pipe running between these properties. And often that is where people put lapas and make extensions to their louver decks. And once you try to legalize them, you can't because there's a servitude registered. The same with municipal sewer plans. It is available on the internet in most of the bigger cities. And very often you see that is exactly the areas where people do extensions. And those you can, in many cases, never gets approved. And therefore, it should not be allowed from the beginning to be built. It's always more difficult to break down or tell an owner to break down an addition than to prevent him from doing it in the beginning. Okay, another diagram that's quite important in complexes is the surveyor general diagram indicating the exact size of the bigger of the earth where the units are built on, and very often as well, boundaries of the complexes are not really built at the correct places, where there's big ESCOM power line servitudes. Very often a piece of that is included in the on the property, and when additions is done, it's done not even on the property, but on an adjacent property in the servitude area. Okay, then the most important, and the link is important, is the sectional title plans that I'm
Abrie?
sure most of you are aware of.
Hi, Aubrey. Before you move on to the sectional plans, there are some questions that we had in the chat, if we that relate to the building plans. If we could maybe just address those before we move on.
Okay, we can do that, or we can finish this and perhaps deal with everything. I don't know what you prefer.
If you're comfortable to deal with the questions at the end, we can do that.
I think we might deal with some of it now, so I'll spend another 5 minutes on this, and then we get to questions.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. Okay, sectional title plans indicate ownership. One should not confuse it with building plans that have to do with structures. The main purpose of sectional title plans is to indicate who owns what in a sectional title complex. This is the typical sheet 1. Normally there's 4 or 5 pages of the sectional title plan, and it lists the information relating to the description of the property and buildings that the sectional title comprise of. So it will tell you how many buildings are there, and then you will get to the units eventually, because one building can consist of various units. Now, the second page would be a block plan, and this will indicate as a part of the sectional title plan, graphically primarily depicting the position of the buildings in relation to the earth boundaries and other real rights. So you can have a look at that, and you will see the amount of buildings. It can be double story, single story, and then you'll get to the next page, the floor plan, that is that graphically shows how the different sections and common property relate to each other. So each of this will be a section, and then you see in the dotted lines that normally would indicate common property on it. So by looking at the sectional title plan, the floor plans, you will exactly see what the approved dimension, well, what it looks like. And if you go to the next page, the square meters, interesting to know that if you have a building plan for your section and you have a sectional title plan for your section, the areas will differ. The building plan area will always be bigger. Why? Because in sectional title, the area of the section is surveyed by a land surveyor in the middle of the outside wall. The outside layer of brick basically is common property and belongs to the body corporate. Between 2 units in the middle, each brick belongs to a unit. So if you have a building plan, that would be measured on the outside of the building and will therefore always be slightly bigger than the sectional title plan. And you need to know which area you deal with. Of course, for calculating levies and participation quotas, the sectional title plans are used, and therefore it's a smaller one. Now, the link that exists between a building plan and sectional title plan is the fact that the land surveyor, when he surveys a section or extension, must certify that no other law is not adhered to. Because a building plan is basically a law, he must have an approved building plan for the additions, for instance, that he wants to add to the section. And therefore, we often find it when people are selling a unit and the additions was done, that they want the land surveyor just to go and survey it and change the sectional title plans. But that cannot happen if the building plan have not been approved. And as we said, where there's a site development plan, the building plan cannot be approved before the site development plan is approved. So it can easily take more than 6 months, sometimes up to a year, to rectify these 3 types of plans when the bank insists on updated plans or a buyer insists on it. And therefore, it is part of the responsibilities of a body corporate via the trustees to ensure that the site development plan, the building plans, and the sectional title plans are up to date. The consequences, if by just condoning additions in a complex, for instance, enclosing patios and things like that, or building rooms, means that the participation quota that will be on the last page is incorrect. And that means that people that have no additions will, in principle, be paying a part of the levy that the owner should have paid that made additions. The bigger your unit, the more levy you'll pay. And therefore, there is more and more, and with CSOS now fairly easily accessible, there's more and more cases where people just go to CSOS and say, listen, I am paying more levy than I should because the body corporate have not forced people to update their sectional title plans. So therefore, one always needs to make sure that your sectional title plans are up to date. And to do that, you need to follow the procedure as we discussed. Just a quick referral to what we call sectional title complex audits. The problem in complexes, and the older, the bigger the problem is, that body corporates have no idea what is legal, what was added, what the coverage is. So we undertake quite a bit of complex audits, and it is scary to see the results of it. What we basically do is we take the site development plan, the building plan, the sectional title plans, and we compare them, and then we compare them with what is actually on site. And this is just from an existing one. All the red on here is not on building plans or on sectional title plans. Another one where a huge amount of stuff was added. And I think if we look at the whole complex, you'll see it is scary, the amount of illegal structures that we find in complexes. And in some cases, the floor area ratio is exceeded. Garages that have been converted into living areas have made the parking requirements not sufficient. So it is a starting point for body corporates that realize that it's their responsibility to comply to all rules and regulations, to start off with making sure what is the status quo at this stage, to know how to deal with it. And again, I just want to repeat, whenever body corporates or trustees give permission for anybody for extensions, it should always refer to the need to comply to town planning regulations, building plan regulations, and all the sectional title regulations. As I said, in most complexes, this one, there was 32 units, 28 of them didn't comply. So it's very seldom that we find, well, we've never found one that complied with all the rules and regulations. But we are excited if we find one that's about 50-50. That's one of the best schemes. But because people are starting to battle to sell units, it is becoming more important to make sure that all your plans are up to date. Okay. If we can perhaps, we can quickly have a look at the questions. We have another 10 minutes or so. So if there's questions, would you like to read them to me, perhaps, Lamie, or?
Yes, there are some questions that came directly to me. In fact, there's two from Shirley Bailey. If one has a flat roof and builds another story on that, I know you will need plans, but does that increase coverage?
No, it will not increase coverage purely because you have a bird's eye view. So you already, the bottom part already covered that piece of land. So building on top of that will not increase the coverage. It will increase what we call the floor area ratio. And there's also a limit to that. But that is not often a problem in complexes because people mostly just go sideways and not up. So it can affect, it can exceed the floor area ratio, but it will not affect your coverage at all.
Awesome. Then the next question is, our building is putting up heat pumps behind a wall. Should that have building plans, even though it is not covered with a roof?
There's unfortunately quite a few gray areas. Technically, yes. But in real life, it's not going to make any difference to coverage or anything like that. It's very much like a swimming pool pump. So my view is, let's deal with the serious issues. If plans are submitted for the complex, you can indicate it on there. But I won't bother to deal with that if that's the only thing in the complex.
The next question, and I think you may have touched on it, but Annie wants to know, do you need plans when making a 1-bed into a 2-bed with drywall?
Yes, you definitely need plans for it for various reasons. The one can be, for instance, parking requirements. Some of the zonings is set up to say that, listen, for a 1-bedroom, you need 1 parking space. For a 2-bedroom or more, you need 2 parking spaces. So by doing it, you can make the parking requirements that you can't meet the parking requirements for the complex. Secondly, the material that is used for the drywalling should comply to all the fire regulations. Again, if you use material that is not fire resistant and you cause a fire in the complex, the insurer can say, listen, this is not brick and tiles. You did not comply to, you do get drywalling that comply, but you just used hardboard and whatever. So you can negatively affect the insurance of the complex.
And then the next one is, we had a Wendy hut for our security guards at the entrance. Does it need to be on plans?
Yes, it always needs to be on plan. Any Wendy, except there is in certain municipalities, it might be seen as a minor building work. If it's 4 square meters or something like that, I would recommend that you ask the specific municipality where you are how they see it. It might be that it can be seen as a minor building work.
Is a certificate of occupancy needed for a carport?
Yes, it needs to be inspected because, again, submit the building plan with the proper steel sizes indicated and the plan is approved. You get a contractor or your neighbor or whatever, and he has some scrap metal that he used, and it's substandard and it's not going to be safe. And so, yes, it needs to be inspected to ensure the safety of it.
This was an interesting one from Melissa. If the surveyor has not clearly distinguished between solid and dotted lines and what is common property and what is the section, is it up to the trustee's interpretation, or must the body corporate clarify any uncertainty in the rules? Or should the surveyor be approached to redo the plans to make it 100% clear so as not to be questioned?
Yeah. Normally, if you read the plans properly, there will be indications, and I think the golden rule, if it's not part of the section and it's not explicit that it's exclusive use area, then it's common property. So the plans, on the plans, you will find the answers. You perhaps just need to go to a professional that can assist you with it, but there is enough information on the plans to indicate what is common property, what exclusive use. Just a reminder that some exclusive use areas is registered in the rules. It will not be on the plans, but it can be registered as part of your rules at CSOS. So it must be read with the plans for the sectional title.
Clive Reynolds has a question here wanting you to comment on retractable awnings.
Okay, again, a bit of a gray area. Typically, council will support a 1 meter roof overhang. You don't need a plan for. Now, retractable awnings, if the building inspector comes out and it's retracted, he will not comment on it. So it is difficult to really, from a building plan point of view, insist on a plan because it can retract. From the body corporate side, it can have visually a negative effect on the complex. So it is more a matter of how is it negatively affecting the complex when it is not retracted, and if the body corporate want those type of things in the complex. The idea of a complex, again, and that's where the site development plan come in, is that you want it to operate as one unit. So visually, there must be similarities. You can't have each person deciding, I'm going to have a yellow awning, I'll have a pink one, I have a canvas. So the idea is to have rules that make it possible for people to not negatively affect the visuals in a complex.
David Scannell asked a question, and I think it's probably the last one we're going to have time for. Do both carports and shade ports need plans, or are they handled differently?
Again, depending on the council, in Tshwane, you need building plans for both. The only difference is the carport will be added to the coverage, while the shade netting will not be added to the coverage, but both need to be indicated on a building plan.
Okay, awesome. There are a few more questions that we didn't have time to get to, but we will jot them all down, and then if we can pass them on to Abrie, if we can answer them ourselves, we will come back to the participants who have asked the questions. Guys, I think that's it for us for today. Abrie, thank you very much. The session was definitely very informative. I've learned a lot. I hope everyone else did too. The recording, as I said in the beginning, will be available as soon as possible. We'll download it and put it up on our website. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a good rest of your day and a good week and weekend ahead. Thanks.
Thank you for
Thanks
the
very much.
opportunity. Have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye.
Goodbye.